The letter reached me in late September, wedged between utility bills and a grocery circular. It was from a law office 2 counties over, and it said, in careful language, that my great-uncle Carden Lyle had left me his farm. I had met Uncle Carden maybe 3 times in my life. He'd come to funerals, stand at the edge of the room, shake hands like he was doing a job, then disappear before dessert. My mom called him the quiet one. My dad called him the one who never leaves the land. I called him nothing at all. When the lawyer handed me the deed and the keys, he didn't offer condolences. He offered instructions. It's isolated, he said, as if that explained everything. The main house is sound. The outbuildings are serviceable. The well works. The road is maintained by the county until the first real snow. Then you're on your own. Why me? I asked. The lawyer looked at me like he'd been asked the wrong question. You were the only one who didn't refuse in writing, he said. Everyone else was very clear. I drove out there the next morning with a duffel bag, a half-charged phone, and the kind of stubborn curiosity that always shows up when grief leaves a gap. The last gas station was 20 miles back. After that, it was fields, thin woods, and a gravel lane that narrowed until my tires were the only tracks. The farmhouse sat in a low bowl of land, white paint, dark roof, porch wrapped around the front like arms folded tight. What startled me wasn't how rundown it was. It wasn't. The porch steps had been swept. The yard had been mowed recently. A new padlock hung on the barn. Even the mailbox flag was up, bright red, like someone expected mail. Inside, the air smelled clean, not abandoned. The kitchen table held a stack of supplies, paper towels, canned soup, a fresh box of matches, 2 gallons of water, and a plastic folder labeled generator. The generator itself sat behind the house with a tarp over it. And when I lifted the tarp, I saw a service tag dated last week. I walked room to room, half expecting to find a squatter or a broken window or the mold the lawyer had hinted at. Instead, I found small signs of care. A full propane tank, a first aid kit restocked, a flashlight with fresh batteries. The place had been prepared the way you prepare a boat before a storm, like someone wanted the next person to last. On the kitchen table, beneath the matches, was a note written on lined paper in blocky handwriting. If the corn is still, you do not step into it. That was it. No signature, no explanation, no second rule. Just that sentence, underlined once, with a faint smear of dirt along the bottom edge, as if it had been held by a thumb that didn't wash well. I laughed, because the rule sounded like folklore, the kind of thing you'd put on a fall decoration next to a pumpkin. The cornfield behind the house was huge, stretching to the tree line on 3 sides. Rows so dense they made the land look stitched. I told myself the note was about trespassing or getting lost. Cornfields can kill you, in their own quiet way. I spent the afternoon doing the practical things people do to feel in control. I tested the well pump. I checked the fuse box. I walked the perimeter of the yard and made a mental map of the barn, the shed, the gravel drive. In daylight, the corn behaved like corn. It swayed when the wind moved. It rustled. It smelled green and alive. By sunset, the temperature dropped fast. The sky turned the color of bruised steel, and the wind picked up in the trees. I stood on the porch with a mug of coffee, listening to branches rattle and watching the field darken into a single mass. That's when I noticed the corn wasn't moving anymore. The grass by my boots bent in the wind. The porch flag snapped once against its pole. The maple trees along the drive shivered with gusts. But the cornfield stood perfectly still, every stalk upright, every tassel frozen, like a photograph pasted into the landscape. I took 1 step off the porch, not toward the field, just into the yard, and the stillness held. The air felt thicker near the rows, as if sound didn't want to travel there. Then I heard it, a soft shushing sound coming from inside the corn, steady and patient, like someone trying to quiet a child. I stood there with my breath caught, staring at the dark line where yard became rows, and for the first time all day, the note stopped being funny. I went back inside and locked the door, but the shushing followed me in the vents. In the kitchen, the corn's shadow lay across the floor like a warning. By morning, the wind was still up, and the trees around the driveway were thrashing like they'd been insulted. In daylight, the corn finally behaved like corn again. Stalks swayed, tassels shivered, and you could hear that dry whisper of leaves brushing leaves. If I hadn't heard the shushing in my vents, I would have laughed at myself for locking the doors. But when I walked the yard, I noticed something. The boundary where grass met rose felt colder, not temperature. Cold closer, like stepping near a pond on a hot day. The birds avoided it. I tried to treat the note like farm common sense. Don't get lost. Don't trespass after dark. Don't be an idiot. I spent the afternoon fixing little things that were fixed, because I needed my hands busy. I checked the generator, checked the barn padlock, checked the well again. Every so often, I caught myself listening for the shushing sound like you listen for a drip after you've seen water damage. At 3 o'clock I drove into town, if you can call it that. A feed store, a diner, a post office, and a church that looked older than the road. I bought diesel additive and asked the woman behind the counter, a lady with gray hair and a face like dried apple peel, if she knew Uncle Carden. Her eyes flicked to my hands. Not my face, my hands. Farm up on Lyle Road, she asked. I nodded. Her mouth tightened. You the new one. I inherited it, I said, and immediately wished I hadn't used that word. Inherited made it sound like I'd won something. She set my change down carefully, as if sudden movement mattered. He leave you the note. What note? Her eyes sharpened. Don't play dumb. I swallowed and said, the Cornfield rule. For the first time she looked relieved, and that relief scared me more than fear would have. Good, she murmured. Then you got a chance. A chance for what? I asked. She leaned closer, voice low enough that I had to lean in too. For not to learn you, she said. My throat went dry. Learn me how. She tapped the counter twice with her fingernail, then once more, as if she was knocking on something invisible. Names, habits, the way you walk, the way you cuss, the way you say help, when you think nobody's listening. I forced a laugh. That's crazy. Corn's crazy, she replied without a smile. You just live next to it. I asked why nobody told me anything. Because folks who talk about it end up proving it's there, she said. And proving is what it wants. On the drive back, I kept my eyes on the tree line. The farm road felt longer than it had that morning, the woods closing in like they'd moved. When my tires hit the gravel lane, my radio crackled once and went silent again. Like it had tried to speak and thought better of it. At home, the day stayed normal until the sun started to tip. The wind died fast, the way it does sometimes before a storm, and the world went unnaturally quiet. Not peaceful quiet. I stood on the porch and watched the corn. The stalks stopped moving one by one, like someone was turning off a room of fans. The tassels froze. The rustle vanished. Within a minute the field was still again. A solid wall of dark green holding its breath. That's when a cat came tearing across my yard. Gray, skinny, feral. It didn't belong to me. It didn't even look at me. It ran like it was being chased. It hit the edge of the corn and vanished between the rows without pushing stalks aside. It just slipped in as if the plants made room for it. My body lurched forward before my mind could stop it. Reflex sympathy. Idiot hero instinct. I stopped at the boundary, boots on grass, corn inches away, and I remembered the note. If the corn is still, you do not step into it. From inside the rows came the sound of a cat yowling. Loud, frantic, close. Then the yowl changed, smoothing into a quieter sound. A purr. Then, in the exact pitch of that cat's cry, I heard my name called once, soft and questioning, like the cat had learned to speak. I backed away, heart hammering. When I looked down at the grass, I saw a trail leading from the corn to my porch steps, flattened blades. Damp soil pressed into a line, as if something had walked out of the field and up to my door while I was inside. The corn behind it remained perfectly still, innocent as a photograph, and the porch boards, right beneath my welcome mat, gave a single soft shush, like someone telling the house to be quiet. The next few days fell into a rhythm that almost made me believe I could live there. Daylight was honest. It asked for work and rewarded you with the kind of tired that lets you sleep. I fixed a sagging hinge on the barn door. I replaced a cracked hose on the pressure tank. I walked the fence line with a staple gun and a pocket of clips, resecuring what deer had loosened. I found Uncle Carden's tools hung in the shed in neat rows, cleaned and oiled, like he'd set them down yesterday and expected to pick them up again tomorrow. The cornfield behaved in the sun. Stalks shifted when I brushed past the edge. Leaves rasped in the breeze. Birds landed on tassels and threw tiny shadows on the rows. If I stood at the boundary long enough, I could pretend it was just a field, just plants, just property. But dusk turned it into something else. It wasn't that the corn went still all at once. It was worse than that. The stillness arrived like a decision traveling through the rows. The far edge would stop first, the part closest to the woods, then the middle, then the section nearest the farmhouse, as if the field didn't want to scare me too quickly. As if it wanted me to get used to the idea that the world could move without sound while it remained perfectly quiet. The first night after the cat incident, I stayed inside with every curtain drawn. I kept the porch light off. I didn't cook. I ate cold soup and listened to the house settle. At 8:41 p.m., my phone chimed. Not a call, not a text. The default low battery tone I hadn't heard since college. My phone was on the counter, at 70%. The screen lit up anyway, then went dark. I didn't touch it. A minute later, the same chime came again. Fainter this time, muffled, like it had happened in another room. Except I was alone, and the only other room was the hallway. I stood very still, and realized the sound hadn't come from the phone at all. It had come from the direction of the back door, from the side of the house that faced the corn. That was when I started treating the rule like a rule you could build your life around, instead of a superstition you could laugh at. I stopped saying my own name out loud when I was alone. It felt ridiculous, but it also felt safer. I stopped talking to myself while I worked. I stopped reading labels out loud in the pantry. I even caught myself holding my breath when I walked past windows at dusk. Like the sound of breathing might count as participation. On the third evening, I found the second sign that Uncle Carden had prepared me. It wasn't another note on the table. It was buried in the junk drawer beneath a stack of seed catalogs and a roll of twine. An old cassette recorder, the kind with a red record button and a cracked plastic lid. A single tape was already inside it, labeled in block letters. Play only in daylight. I stared at that label for a long time before I did what it said. The next morning, with sun pouring through the kitchen window, and the corn swaying like normal behind the glass, I pressed play. Static hissed, then a click. Uncle Carden's voice filled the kitchen. Not ghostly, not distorted. Just a tired older man speaking close to a cheap microphone. If you're hearing this, he said, then you're here. And if you're here, you already found my note. Good, I didn't have the patience to write it twice. My throat tightened. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear another human voice in that house until it happened. He continued calm, almost practical. I'm not asking you to understand. I'm asking you to obey one thing. If the corn is still, you do not step into it. Not for an animal. Not for a person. Not because you think you heard something. That's when it's listening. He paused, and in the quiet gap I heard the faint rustle of paper on his end, like he was reading from a list. It learns in patterns, he said. It learns the way you walk, the way you swear, the way you call for someone when you're scared. It learns what makes you move without thinking, and when it learns enough, it doesn't have to stay in the field. A soft thump sounded in the recording, like he'd set something down hard. I'm leaving this place to you because I can't keep doing it, he said, and his voice tightened for the first time. Not because I want you punished, because a farm without someone watching it becomes a door, and I'm not dying with the door open. The recorder hissed again. Uncle Carden lowered his voice. If you ever see a line in the corn that looks like someone walked straight to the house, he said, don't follow it. Sweep it away. Make your own footprints. Make it lose the trail. And don't. He stopped as if he'd heard something on his end. Don't answer it when it sounds like someone you miss. The tape clicked, and the voice cut off mid-thought. Not an ending, an interruption. I sat there with my hand on the recorder, staring at the paused spool through the cracked lid. Outside, the corn moved in the breeze, like nothing had ever been wrong with it. Then, from the edge of the field, I heard a single kernel drop onto dry soil, sharp and deliberate, like a bead hitting a tabletop. And somewhere just beyond the rows, something made the softest shushing sound, as if the corn wanted the daylight to be quiet too. On the fifth morning, I found the scarecrow. It wasn't there the day before. I know that because I'd been walking the edge of the field with a rake, dragging dead leaves out of the shallow ditch that ran along the rows. I had stared at that same corner of corn long enough to see every broken stalk, and every spot where deer had pushed in overnight. Now, there it was, standing 10 yards inside the field, right where the rows began to tighten. A shape in old clothes, arms spread on a crossbar, head bowed slightly, like it was ashamed. Scarecrows aren't that weird in farm country. People still put them up as decoration more than deterrent. But this one didn't look decorative. It looked purposeful, like someone had placed it to face something. It was wearing a flannel shirt and denim overalls, both sun-faded, both dirty at the knees. A burlap sack covered the head. 2 dark buttons for eyes. A stitched line for a mouth that curved just barely, not quite a smile. The first thing I noticed, though, was what it was facing. Not the woods. Not the open field. My house. It stood in the rows with its button, eyes aimed straight at my porch, like it was watching me wake up. I felt cold creep down my spine. I took a step closer to the boundary and squinted. The corn was moving in the breeze. Normal, rustling, alive. The scarecrow didn't sway. It didn't lean with the wind. It held perfectly still, rigid, like the stalks around it had been trained to move while it remained fixed. I told myself it was a prank, a neighbor messing with the new guy. Maybe the woman at the feed store had told someone I was out here alone, and some bored local decided to scare me. But who walks into a cornfield in daylight and sets up a scarecrow without leaving footprints? Who knows exactly where to place it, so it can be seen from my kitchen window, like a warning? I didn't step into the rows. The rule was for when the corn was still, but I wasn't eager to test how literal it was. I stayed on grass and watched. Then, I noticed the shirt. It was my shirt. Not exactly, not like a name tag, but I recognized the pattern. Red and black plaid with a small burn mark near the lower hem. I'd packed that shirt 2 days ago from my apartment. I'd worn it the first morning. I checked the barn padlock and burned the hem on the generator exhaust. I hadn't lost it. I'd hung it over the back of a chair in the bedroom. My throat tightened. I walked inside and checked. The chair was empty. The shirt was gone. I didn't say anything out loud. I just stood there, staring at the empty chair, like it had accused me. That afternoon, I drove into town again and bought a trail camera from the feed store. The woman behind the counter didn't ask why. She rang it up and slid it across to me like she was handing me a bandage. "You don't point it at the house," she said quietly. I froze. What? She met my eyes for the first time. Her gaze was steady and tired. "You point it at the field edge," she said, "and you don't check it at night." I swallowed. "Have you done this before?" She didn't answer. She just added, "And if you see something you recognize, don't go thinking it means you're safe." I set the trail cam on a fence post by the ditch, angled at the scarecrow in the first few rows of corn. I checked the battery. I checked the timestamp. I pressed the test button and watched the little red sensor blink. Then I walked away without looking back. That night, the corn went still earlier than usual. I knew because the wind was still blowing in the trees, but when I peeked through a crack in my curtains, the field behind the barn looked like a frozen ocean. No ripple, no sway. Just a dark wall under moonlight. I stayed inside and kept my mouth shut. Around 11 o'clock, I heard footsteps on my porch. Slow, careful. Not the stumble of a drunk. Not the light patter of an animal. Footsteps, like someone wearing boots. I didn't go to the door. I didn't look out. I sat in my kitchen chair with the cassette recorder in front of me like a talisman, listening to the house breathe. The footsteps stopped. Then came a soft shushing sound right outside my kitchen window, as if someone on the porch wanted me to be quiet too. I clenched my fists and stared at the table until my knuckles ached. By morning, the porch was empty. No tracks in the dew, no cigarette butts. Nothing to prove I hadn't imagined it. I went straight to the trail camera anyway, because daylight made me braver. The camera was still mounted. No damage. No missing battery. I pulled the SD card, carried it inside, and sat at the kitchen table with the curtains open wide, and the sun fully up. Play only in daylight echoed in my head, even though this wasn't the tape. I plugged the card into my laptop. The footage loaded. The first clip showed me setting the camera, normal. The second clip showed the corn swaying, birds landing on stalks, dust motes floating, hours passing in time, lapse. Then, around 7:13 p.m., the corn slowed. The stalks stopped moving one by one, like the breeze had been turned off in sections. The field became still. The scarecrow remained in frame, facing the house. At 7:22, something changed. The scarecrow turned its head. Not a full turn, a few degrees, enough that the button eyes no longer faced my porch. The burlap head angled slightly, as if listening to something deeper in the rows. At 7:23, the scarecrow moved again. Its body shifted, just a small adjustment, like someone easing their weight from one foot to the other. I leaned closer to the screen, breath caught. The camera froze. Not the video, the frame itself locked, perfectly still, as if the file had become a photograph. In that frozen frame, the scarecrow was closer, not by inches, by several feet. Close enough that I could see the stitching on the burlap sack head, and the muddy smear on the overalls. Close enough that it should have triggered dozens of frames of motion, but there were none. Just that one frozen frame. Like the camera had blinked and missed the steps in between. My stomach dropped. I scrubbed back, frame by frame. The scarecrow was far, then suddenly close. Then the next clip started, and the scarecrow was back in its original position. Like nothing had happened. I sat back in my chair shaking, laptop humming, sunlight filling the kitchen. Outside, in the cornfield, the scarecrow stood exactly where it had been, facing my house. And when I went to the bedroom to grab another shirt, I found the drawer open. My clothes were neatly folded again, too neat, stacked like someone had organized them for me. And on top of the pile was the flannel I'd lost, cleaned, dried, and smelling faintly like corn silk. The message was clear. It didn't just take things. It returned them, as if it wanted me to get used to borrowing. The first time someone else tested the rule, it wasn't a voice in the corn or a camera glitch. It was a man on my porch. It was 9:17 p.m. The wind had died the way it always did before the stillness settled. In the yard, my porch light threw a clean circle on the steps, and beyond that circle the cornfield was a black wall. No rustle, no sway. Even the crickets sounded muted, like they'd been told to keep it down. The knock came hard enough to rattle the screen door. I froze at the kitchen table, hands flat on the wood, listening. A second knock followed, faster, and then a voice strained, breathy, human. "Hello, please, I need help." I didn't answer. I moved to the window and parted the curtain just enough to see without offering my full silhouette. A man stood on the porch with his shoulders hunched against the cold. Mid-30s, maybe. Beanie pulled low, jacket too light for the hour. His eyes kept flicking toward the yard, toward the corn. He saw the movement of my curtain and raised both hands. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I'm not trying to freak you out. My truck's stuck. I took the wrong road." His voice sounded normal. That was the dangerous part. Normal made my body want to switch into neighbor. Mode, open the door, offer a phone, be the decent person in the middle of nowhere. I thought about the tape, Uncle Carden's voice. Don't answer it when it sounds like someone you miss. This wasn't someone I missed. This was someone who looked cold and real. I opened the door a crack, keeping the chain on. "Road's back that way," I said. "I know," he said, voice shaking with frustration. "It's washed out. I tried turning around and slid into the ditch. I'm on foot." He swallowed and pointed with his chin, not his hand. "I saw your lights. I just need to cut across your field to get to the county road. It'll save me an hour." My stomach tightened. The corn was still. I could feel it from the doorway. That pressure in the air like the field was listening. "You can't go through there," I said. The man blinked. "It's just corn." I felt my fingers curl around the door edge. "Not tonight." He looked past me into the house as if searching for another adult, another authority. "Lady, I'm not trying to trespass. I'm freezing. I'll pay you, I just." "Come inside," I said, before I could talk myself out of it. "Warm up. We'll figure something out in the morning." His eyes flashed with relief so sharp it hurt. Then his gaze flicked to the yard again, and that relief twisted into panic. "No," he whispered. I can't stay. I can't stay here. What? I asked. He stepped back off the porch, and my porch boards creaked under his weight. Something's out there, he said. His breath came fast. I heard it on the road, like somebody walking in the ditch beside my truck. I tightened my grip on the door. Get in. He hesitated, staring at the dark line where grass became rose. The cornfield didn't move. It didn't whisper. It just waited, still as a held breath. Then the man's phone chimed. A bright, familiar notification sound in the quiet night. He looked down at his screen and his face went blank. That's not possible, he whispered. What? I said again, and hated how small my voice sounded. He raised the phone so I could see. The screen showed an incoming call. No number, no name, just the word home. The phone stopped ringing. A voicemail icon appeared. The man's thumb hovered, then pressed play like he couldn't help himself. A voice came through the tiny speaker, soft, calm, close. His wife, or mother, or someone he loved. I couldn't tell, but I saw his face change the way people's faces change when a private memory gets touched. Baby, the voice said gently. Don't make it hard, just take the shortcut. The man started shaking. No, he whispered, and backed away from my porch as if my house had betrayed him. The voicemail ended. Silence dropped. Then, from inside the corn, something made a soft shushing sound. The man turned toward it, like a compass needle, snapping north. Hey, he shouted, voice cracking. Who's there? I flinched. The rule didn't say anything about shouting, but my body knew shouting was attention, and attention was what the field wanted. He took one step onto the grass. I snapped. Stop. He didn't hear me, or he did and didn't care. He took another step, and the corn remained perfectly still. No rustle, no sway, no sound of stalks parting. He ran into it, anyway. Not a crash through rows, not the loud tearing you expect. He simply slipped between two stalks and vanished, swallowed by stillness as if the field had opened its mouth. I stood on my porch with the chain still latched, unable to move, watching the black wall of corn and waiting for the scream. A minute passed. No scream. 2 minutes. Nothing but the faint hum of my porch light. Then the man's voice came from inside the rows, calm and close, as if he stood right on the other side of the first stalk. Hey, he said gently. Can you let me back in now? And the corn shushed, soft and satisfied, like it had learned a new voice to use. I didn't unlock the chain. I didn't answer him. I didn't even breathe too loud. I stood on my porch staring into a wall of still corn, while a man I just watched disappear spoke to me as if he'd only stepped behind a curtain. Come on, his voice said again, patient. It's fine in here. The porch light buzzed faintly. My throat burned. Every nerve in my body screamed to do something. Call 911. Grab a flashlight. Run into the rows. Anything that would make me feel like a person instead of a witness. But Uncle Carden's rule wasn't about being brave. It was about refusing to participate. So I shut the door slowly, locked it, and sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the fridge until morning. I didn't sleep. I listened. All night the corn stayed still. No wind sound. No rustle. Just that soft occasional shushing in the vents like the house and the field were breathing together. Once, around 2 a.m., my phone chimed with a notification sound. I hadn't used since college. I didn't look. I didn't touch it. I let the screen glow and die on its own. In the early gray before sunrise, the stillness broke. The first breeze moved the tassels, and the field rustled like it had been released from a held breath. Birds started up. The world made ordinary noise again. I went outside. There were no footprints at the edge of the corn, no torn stalks. No evidence anyone had ever run into it. Just a neat line of dew on the first row, unbroken. I drove into town as soon as the feed store opened and told the woman behind the counter that someone had gone into the field. Her face tightened, but she didn't look surprised. Did you follow? She asked. No. A soft exhale. Good. He's gone, I said, and my voice cracked on the last word. The woman's mouth pressed thin. Then he's in it now. I felt sick. We need to call someone. Her gaze went sharp. You call the sheriff and you tell him a man got lost in corn. He'll send deputies with flashlights and dogs. You know what happens when the corn is still, and you bring more eyes to it. My stomach dropped. What? She leaned closer, voice low. It learns faster, she said, and it learns more. I stared at her, shaking. So we do nothing. She hesitated. For the first time, I saw something like regret flicker across her face. We do what your uncle did, she said softly. We keep it from being hungry enough to move. That sentence hit me like ice. Hungry enough to move. The field hadn't chased that man. It hadn't needed to. It had just opened. I drove back to the farm with that phrase stuck in my throat. By the time I reached the gravel lane, the sun was fully up and the corn swayed like normal, innocent as any crop. In daylight, it was hard to believe the field could swallow a person without leaving a trace. So I did the other stupid thing people do when they don't want to accept magic. I looked for paperwork. Uncle Carden had been the kind of man who made notes. If he'd lived with a rule like that, there would be more than one sentence on a scrap of paper. There would be a pattern. I tore the farmhouse apart. Not frantic searching, methodical, drawers, cabinets. Behind pictures, under the sink, in the barn, in old coffee cans. In the back of the pantry, where you keep what you don't use. What I found, tucked inside a tin box labeled nails, was a ledger. Old dirt, smudged with dates written in the margin, and short lines of notes like farm accounting, fuel, feed, seed repairs. Except every entry had one extra line in the same blocky handwriting. As the corn rule, still, too moving. Sometimes it was just that, a slash and a word. Sometimes it had time beside it. Still, 7:18 p.m. Moving, 6:02 a.m. And then, every so often, there was a second note written underneath in heavier pen strokes. Do not enter. Or, once underlined twice. No names. My throat tightened. It wasn't superstition. It was logging. A record of when the field became still, when it listened, and when it returned to being ordinary plant matter. At the back of the ledger, behind the last year's notes, I found a page folded in half and tucked into the cover like a bookmark. It was written in Uncle Carden's hand, but the writing was tighter, angrier. The inheritance wasn't generosity. It was a handoff. The note read, "The field isn't cursed. It's trained. When it's moving, it's only corn. When it's still, it's a surface. It records what you give it. Time. If you step in while it's still, your footsteps become a path. It can follow back out. If you speak a name while it's still, it gets a handle it can pull on. If you go in for someone, you teach it what rescue looks like. The rule is one sentence, because you can't follow 10 rules when you're panicking. Find known rule is enough. Find tea. Keep it hungry, it stays quiet. Feed it fear, it learns to walk. I sat at the kitchen table, reading that last line over and over, until my hands stopped shaking. Keep it hungry, it stays quiet. My stomach rolled, hungry enough to move. The feed store woman's words clicked into place. This wasn't a ghost story. It was containment, maintenance, like Marty's transfer station rules, like the impound yards routine. A system that only worked if people treated it like infrastructure instead of a mystery. I looked out the back window at the corn swaying in daylight, and realized why Uncle Carden had left the farm to me. Not because he loved me, because someone had to stay close enough to watch for stillness. Someone had to keep the rule. And now, after last night, the field had a new voice inside it. A stranger's voice that sounded calm and safe, asking to be let back in. It had learned one more way to make a human step forward. And if it learned enough ways, it wouldn't need to wait for dusk. It would be able to move in daylight too. That was the real inheritance. Not land. A job. A boundary. And the sick knowledge that if I ever broke the one rule, the cornfield wouldn't just take me. It would start walking the roads between farms, listening for names. The storm came in, like it had been waiting for the right evening. All afternoon the sky was low and bright, clouds packed tight like wool. The air felt wrong, too warm for the season, too still, like the world was holding its breath. By dusk, The wind had a wet edge to it, and the trees by the driveway started swaying hard enough to throw shadows across my porch. I told myself storms were good. Storms meant noise. Noise meant cover. Storms meant the corn would move because wind was wind and plants had to obey physics. At 6:47 p.m., the power flickered. At 6:48, it went out. The house fell into sudden silence. Refrigerator dead. Lights gone. The comforting hum of appliances vanishing like a rug pulled out. In the dark, the cornfield behind the barn became a solid mass, and my stomach tightened with a familiar dread. I grabbed the flashlight and checked the generator. Uncle Carden had left it serviced. A full tank, fresh oil. I pulled the starter cord. Nothing. I tried again, harder. The cord yanked back like the engine didn't want to turn. The generator made a choking sputter and died. I stood there in the dark, rain starting to tick against the tarp, and felt the smallest, coldest realization settle into my gut. The generator wasn't broken. It was being refused. Behind me, the trees in the yard swayed in the storm wind. The porch flag snapped and fluttered. Rain hissed through leaves. The corn did not move. In my flashlight beam, the first rows stood rigid and upright like plastic. Not a leaf trembled, not a tassel shook. The field was still while the world around it thrashed. My breath came shallow. I backed away from the generator and went inside, locking the door like that mattered. The house felt too quiet without power. Every room became a pocket of darkness where sound could travel wrong. I lit 2 candles on the kitchen table and kept the flashlight in my hand like a weapon. Then the shushing started. Not loud, not dramatic. Just the softest hiss in the vents above the stove, like air moving through a throat. A sound that didn't match the storm outside. The shushing came again, closer, in the hallway. Not from the vents now. From inside the walls, like the house itself was trying to quiet me. I swallowed hard and remembered the ledger note when it's still. It's a surface. It records what you give it. The storm hit the roof harder. Thunder rumbled far off. My candle flames leaned and wavered. And then, through the rain, I heard tapping on my porch. 3 taps. Pause, 2 taps. My skin went ice cold. I didn't move. The tapping came again, more insistent. 3 to 2. The porch boards creaked, slow footfalls, as if someone was walking from the steps to my front door. Then a voice called from outside, muffled through wood and rain. Hello? It was a man's voice, calm, familiar enough to hurt. The trespasser, the one who'd run into the corn last night. He sounded warm, like he was standing close under my porch light, safe and dry. I'm okay, he said. You can open up now. My throat tightened. I kept my mouth shut so hard my jaw ached. The voice continued, gentle. It was just corn. I got turned around. I found a path out. The candle flame flickered. The flashlight beam trembled in my hand. A soft shushing sound came from the kitchen vent again. Louder now, like a reminder. Quiet. The man's voice lowered. Please, it's cold out here. Cold. During a storm. In this air, the lie was almost insulting. I didn't answer. The tapping stopped for a moment. Silence pressed in, heavy and listening. Then, the voice changed. My mother's voice. Sweet, worried, perfectly pitched. Honey, it called softly. Open the door, you're scaring me. My chest clenched. Tears stung my eyes so suddenly it felt like an ambush. My mom was alive, but she wasn't here. She was 2 hours away in a town where cornfields were just cornfields. The voice outside continued, warmer now. Baby, it's just me. Let me in. I swallowed hard and stared at the candle flame, forcing my breath through my nose so I didn't make noise. The porch boards creaked again, a slow step closer. The doorknob turned slightly, not forceful, just testing like a polite person checking if it's locked. The knob stopped. Then I heard something new, a faint rustling sound, like corn leaves brushing, inside my house, from the hallway. My skin crawled. I swung my flashlight beam toward the hole and saw nothing but darkness and the outline of my coat rack. Then, at the edge of the beam, the coat rack shifted, not toppled, not knocked by wind, shifted, as if someone had nudged it while passing. The shushing grew louder in the hallway, and a faint smell crept into the kitchen. Sweet. Apple. Sweet. The wrong way smell. My stomach rolled. The field wasn't just listening now. It was pushing into the house through sound and scent, making the inside feel like the edge of the rose. I clenched my fists. Don't step in. Don't speak names. Don't confirm what you hear. I needed a boundary. I grabbed the rock salt from the pantry. Uncle Carden had left a bag of it near the back, like he knew, and I poured a thick line across my back door threshold and along the kitchen windowsill. The salt glittered in candlelight, like crushed glass. The sweet smell hesitated, then pulled back slightly, like it didn't like the taste of that boundary. Outside, the voice on the porch went quiet. Then it laughed, soft, almost disappointed. "You're learning," it said in my voice now, calm and close, like it was standing right behind my ear. My chest tightened. I did not turn around. The tapping began again, but not on the front door this time, on my kitchen window. The glass flexed slightly under the pressure of the knock, and for a heartbeat, in the candlelight, I saw a faint imprint on the other side, a hand-shaped smudge, but too smooth, like plastic pressed to glass. I stepped back, shaking, and the candle flame leaned hard as if a draft had swept through the room. The shushing in the vents became a steady hiss, louder, insistent, like a command. Be quiet. Be quiet. Then the storm outside paused. Not stopped. Paused. The rain softened. The wind died. The world held still for one breath. And in that one breath, the cornfield outside remained perfectly still too. No longer contrasted against wind and rain. Just stillness over everything, like the field had spread its condition outward. My candle flame stood straight, unblinking. From the porch, the voice whispered, close and satisfied. Now, it's listening everywhere. The front door clicked, unlocked. I stared at it, heart pounding. I hadn't touched the lock. The handle turned slowly, the deadbolt sliding back as if moved by a gentle hand. The door began to open. I backed away, salt in one hand, flashlight in the other, candlelight shaking. And in the widening gap, beyond the porch light's weak circle, I saw the corn at the edge of my yard. Rows that hadn't been there yesterday, suddenly closer. Stalks standing rigid only feet from my steps, as if the field had grown overnight. The house wasn't at the edge of the cornfield anymore. The cornfield had moved to the edge of the house. And the rule, one simple sentence, felt suddenly too small to hold back, something that had learned how to bring the rose to you. I didn't step onto the porch. The door was open, yawning, and the cold air spilling in smelled sweet and damp, like bruised apples left in a bucket. The corn stood too close. Rows where there shouldn't have been rows. Stalks rigid in the porch light, like a wall that had crept forward while I blinked. The one rule snapped tight in my head. If the corn is still, you do not step into it. It didn't say anything about the corn stepping into you. The thought made my stomach roll. I backed away from the open door and grabbed the doorframe with both hands, forced it shut, and slammed the deadbolt forward until it clicked. Then I dragged the kitchen chair under the knob, like it could argue with whatever was outside. The moment the latch engaged, the sweet smell eased slightly. The shushing in the vent softened, not gone, just less pleased. I stood there in the dim candlelight, shaking, trying to think like Uncle Carden must have thought. Not, how do I win? How do I maintain? The ledger had been clear. Stillness was a condition, not an event. It came and went. It had a start time and an end time. Still, 7:18 p.m. Moving, 6:02 a.m. Daylight broke it. Motion broke it. If I couldn't fight it at night, I could prepare in day. A boundary, a line, a break in continuity. Corn is only a wall if the rows connect. If you cut a gap wide enough that stalk can't touch stalk, the field stops being one surface and becomes separate pieces. A harvest line. I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen until the candles guttered, and the gray began to seep into the windows. The corn outside stayed rigid for hours. The shushing came and went in soft waves, and twice I heard a voice on the porch. My mother, then the trespasser, testing the door with gentle pleading. I didn't answer. At 5:47 a.m., the sweet smell thinned. The first real breeze moved the maple branches. A few stalks at the very edge of the corn trembled, then stilled again, like the field was resisting daylight, the way a person resists waking up. I waited until 6:03. A minute past the ledger's moving time. Then I stepped outside. The air was cold and honest. Birds started up in the trees. The corn rustled in a normal breeze, tassels shivering like they were relieved to move again. The rows nearest my porch were still closer than they should have been. But in daylight they looked like ordinary corn. That was the trap. In daylight it always looked ordinary enough to tempt you into forgetting. I didn't forget. I went straight to the barn. Uncle Carden kept fuel in a locked cabinet, and the key was on the ring he'd left in the kitchen drawer. I unlocked it and found a half-full jerry can, a spare chain, and a small hand. Written list taped to the inside of the door. No headings, just reminders. Daylight, only. Keep moving. Cut a line, not a path. No names. My throat tightened. I hauled the jerry can to the shed and filled the gas tank on the brush cutter. An old walk, behind trimmer with a blade attachment, heavier than a weed whacker. Built to chew through thick stalks, the engine coughed, then roared to life, and that sound alone made me feel safer. Machines don't care about voices. I walked to the edge of the cornfield, where it pressed closest to the house, and picked a line. Not straight through the field, around it. A perimeter trench, wide enough that the corn couldn't touch the house by row connection. Wide enough that stillness couldn't become one continuous surface from field to porch. I started cutting. The blade screamed through stalks, spraying green sap and shredded leaves. Corn fell in heavy bundles, the smell sharp and fresh. Nothing sweet about it. I cut a strip 10 feet wide, then another, creating a gap like a moat. As I worked, I kept my eyes on the movement of the corn itself. It swayed in wind. It rustled. It behaved. But every so often, I'd hit a pocket where the stalks resisted. Not physically, but in the way the air felt. A sudden quiet patch, like the field wanted to hold still even in daylight. I pushed through those spots without stopping, because stopping felt like letting the field decide the pace. By noon, I'd cut a rough horseshoe around the side of the house that faced the field most directly. Sweat soaked my shirt despite the cold. My arms burned. The brush cutter vibrated my hands numb. I took breaks in the open yard, away from the rows, drinking water, and keeping my mouth shut. Every time I caught myself muttering a curse at the machine, I swallowed it. No names. No speaking into the air near the field. At 3 p.m., the wind shifted, and the corn rustled like a sigh. A faint shushing came from the standing rows. Daylight, wind, normal, and still, the field tried. I cut faster. By 5:30, the strip was wide enough that I could stand between the fallen stalks and the standing wall and see clear ground. No touching leaves, no whispering connection, a boundary. I looked at my watch and felt dread crawl up my spine. The stillness would return soon. I had one more job before sundown, remove the cut corn from the trench. If the stalks stayed piled, the field might still connect through the debris. I needed separation, not just damage. I dragged bundles away with a rake, piling them near the burn barrel by the barn. The work was slow and exhausting. My muscles trembled, the sun dipped lower, and the light turned gold. At 6:58, I felt the shift. The wind was still moving trees, but the corn's rustle softened. The standing rows began to quiet, as if the field was preparing to hold its breath. I forced myself to keep working, keep moving. Cut a line, not a path. Then, I heard it. From inside the standing corn, a voice called out, soft and familiar. My mother. Honey, she said, gentle as a lullaby. Come here a second. My hands froze on the rake handle. The corn behind the voice rustled once, then went still. My stomach dropped. The stillness had returned early. The gap I'd cut lay between me and the standing rows, 10 feet of muddy ground and chopped stalks. It should have been enough, but the voice wasn't coming from the standing rows anymore. It was coming from the pile of cut corn beside me. The stalks I just dragged away shivered slightly, as if something underneath them had shifted. My breath caught. That's what the ledger had meant. It records what you give it. The field didn't need the standing rows to trap you. It could use anything connected to it. Cut stalks, debris, anything that still belonged to the crop. The pile beside me shushed softly. Then the voice, closer now, my mother's voice with perfect warmth, whispered, "It's okay. Just step closer." I backed away so fast my boots slipped in mud. I steadied myself and stared at the trench I'd cut. The boundary I'd built. The standing corn was still now, rigid and listening. But so was the pile of cut stalks near my feet. The stillness had followed the crop itself, not the field. I realized the loophole wasn't just cutting, it was removal. I couldn't leave harvested corn, lying near the house overnight. I grabbed the rake with shaking hands and dragged the cut stalks toward the burn barrel, moving fast now, hard hammering, ignoring the voice, ignoring the shushing. The pile resisted, not heavy wrong. Like dragging something that wanted to stay. The voice turned sharp, for the first time. Stop. My own voice. I flinched, but I didn't stop. I dumped the stalks into the burn barrel and grabbed the matches from my pocket. My fingers shook so badly I dropped one. I picked it up, struck it, and held the flame to the dry leaves. Fire caught. The barrel flared, heat rolling over my face. Smoke rose thick and gray, carrying away the sweet smell before it could settle. The shushing cut off, like someone had been gagged. For a heartbeat, the cornfield at the edge of my trench rustled in the wind again, as if the stillness had lost its anchor. I stood there panting, watching the fire eat the cut corn, and understood something with brutal clarity. Uncle Carden didn't leave me a farm. He left me a nightly cleanup job. Keep the corn moving by day. Keep its pieces away by night. Don't give it debris to connect through. Don't give it names to hold. As the sun dropped behind the trees, the standing rows tried to go still again. But now there was a gap around the house, and the only corn near my porch was ash. The field shushed once, faint and annoyed, from across the trench. Then it went quiet. Not satisfied quiet. Waiting quiet. Like something that had just learned a new rule.